Ideas Behind Bars. This podcast is produced by InSAF India in collaboration with Nether Quarterly. Today we discuss the poetry of Varavara Rao with selected writings from his book Captive Imagination, published in 2010 by Penguin Viking. Varavara Rao was arrested alongside Sudha Bharadwaj, Gautam Navlakha, Vernon Gonsalves, and Arun Ferreira in August 2018 under the current political regime. But, as some of you might know, this was not the first time he has been arrested. He was arrested in 1973, then during the emergency, in 1985, in 2006. He has been arrested 4 times since the formation of the Telangana state in 2014. As a poet, journalist, literary critic, Marxist, a public educator, and civil rights activist who has stood against all forms of state oppression, Varavara Rao has, for decades now, been seen as a threat by state and national governments. The autocratic state machinery, and not just of the current regime, has regularly sought to silence him for espousing quote unquote radical ideas in his writing and poetry, and for his contributions to emancipatory people's movements. In August 2022, at the age of 81, he was granted bail on medical grounds. In our reading of Captive Imagination, the paradox, the irony of the title rings heavy. No, Rao tells us, the imagination cannot be held captive. In chapter 8 of the book, titled Stone Walls Do Not Make a Prison, he writes, and I quote, "Imagination is a man's life here. It is a curse, and a colorful rainbow too. It's an extraordinary material reality. Yesterday's dream is a weapon, the warm feeling enveloping you, preventing you from rising from the cold of a broken dream is a vehicle. The language of the soft rays of the morning sun, stamped and kneaded under the potter's feet, will rise again, creating a new world of feeling." Unquote. Poetry is, in his view, the life force of freedom. It is not a call to violence or a call to hate. It is not propaganda. It is, in his words, and I quote, like a hand stretched out in friendship, a human bond. It is like the flutter of a heart held in an open palm. Varavara Rao's poetry is layered, multifaceted, just like the person that he is. It's not just one text and one meaning. Rao has been an activist, a writer, a journalist, and a teacher. He studied traditional Telugu literature, and he is recognized by many as one of the pioneers of modern Telugu literature, Telugu revolutionary literature. And all of this gets reflected in his writing. At first glance, the poems appear simple or plain. As a speaker in the reading circle pointed out, several Telugu literary critics have dismissed Varavara Rao as a poet because his poetry seems to be just simple reading. But if we locate that poetry in history, if we locate it in people's movements, if we locate it in a particular line of political thought, of radical left people's movements, it reveals layers of meaning that are worth unpacking. Let us read some excerpts from one more poem called Chains Right Now, written on and from prison. Write is spelled as Write. So far, blooming flowers and broadcast perfumes made me write. Now it is your lies that force me to write the truth. So far, breathless agitations and excitement made me stand upright and drove me. Now your imprisonment and iron heels suffocate and turn me metal. You encroach my expansive world, cut it into small, tiny cells, imprison me immobile in a cell, and warn me if I ever infringe. You know my hand is inside the cell, and it is you who tied it down. It is you who broke my pen. But then you are upset that the waves of my dreams are spreading as I sit cramped in this dark cell on this path that I've traveled. I am neither the first nor the last. My song has its own feet, and it was born on that path. Whatever should I do? You charge my dreams, and I can only laugh at you. Even your shadow may not tell you the truth. It may be telling you whatever you want to hear, but you are alone in the outside world. Here inside, I am among innumerable people. I am with the strength of my beliefs. I am, with the power of the people, a volcano that erupts lava and fumes tomorrow, even if it appears silent today. In this long, silent imprisonment, I'm honing my thoughts. Dictator, now my chains are writing. Tomorrow I will sing full throated in freedom. In Rao's poetry, one might often notice there is no history, there are no dates, there is no anger, no threat, no criticism. It is my dreams that you capture, he writes. When one hears Varavara Rao's political speeches, they are replete with historical evidence and detail. His poetic imagination, however, remains deceptively simple and committed to the vernacular, to the accessibility of the freedom of imagination. Ngugi wa Thiong'o puts this well in his introduction to Captive Imagination. I'm going to read a long quote from Thiong'o now. I quote, "The real subject of these letters is imagination. In prison, Rao looks for meaning even in the apparently trivial and inconsequential. He looks at birds that fly and they speak to him of freedom. He looks at nature, flowers, and he sees images of motion, change, and growth. Through the windows, Rao can behold the enormity of a sky that no prison can contain. Nature that speaks of endless motion, interconnection of being, and endless possibilities is his companion. He also finds companionship in history, from a whole array of Indian writers of times past and present to imprisoned artists and intellectuals across cultures and continents." Unquote. The simplicity of Rao's words one notices throughout the book is striking. One notices the extraordinary eloquence of them and the attention to detail. In poetry, the isolation of prison is made trivial. It is those who incarcerated him that are alone, struggling to hold onto their quote unquote power. Here's another poem. How long can prison walls and iron bars cage the free spirit? Insistent, a statue with broken limbs forces its past beauty on you. The sea roars, crashing night and day against the shore. Wings trapped in the mind flutter wildly, seeking to soar in freedom. The mind is too cramped to hold you. What you need is the space of the earth rolling outwards, reaching the edges of the sky. The imagination cannot be held captive, and this appears to be the defining assertion of Rao's poetry. But whose imagination are we talking about? The poem Reflection, also linked in the description, suggests that the answer to this question is a complex one. The tone of this poem is different from the one we just read. Let me read it out to you. Reflection. I did not supply the explosives, nor ideas, for that matter. It was you who trod with iron heels upon the anthill, and from the trampled earth sprouted the ideas of vengeance. It was you who struck the beehive with your lathi. The sound of the scattering bees exploded in your shaken facade, blotched red with fear. When the victory drum started beating in the heart of the masses, you mistook it for a person and trained your guns. Revolution echoed from all horizons. These last lines are particularly striking for the image of solidarity that they present. You can shoot a person, but you cannot stifle the imagination of freedom that belongs to everybody. However, reading this poem makes one realize that the title, Captive Imagination, is also a kind of indictment. Right? There is a captive imagination, but it is not Varavara Rao's. We can look at another poem from chapter 13 of the book, and I quote, "Only the camp belongs to the enemy. The feet that walk in step with the cross belong to friends. Only the chains are the enemies. The bond that connects the hands holding them is of friends. The duties are laid down by the enemy. The helplessness in the eyes which watch belong to friends. The cage belongs to the enemy. He's wrestling with the elements of shared humanity here. He asks, how can those who share the same humanity watch others suffer? He almost pities the people who do this. They're the ones who are incarcerated by the system, held captive. This turn of voice seen in these two poems that I just read connect well to with the work, for example, also of G. N. Sai Baba and others, in expressing a moral concern for the ones who hold them captive. It is the jailers, the policemen who are in solitary confinement, whose imagination is in fact held captive, who have been isolated by the state apparatus, who have not had the chance to experience the freedom of solidarity and companionship. Another excerpt. Pity the solitary ones, the poor policemen, exiled from sleep and refuge, yawn from hour to hour, sub-tea care. This image is a reference to the hourly checks of prisoners in jail. It's striking how, in the poetic imagination here, the elaborate edifice of the prison complex seems flimsy, fragile, insecure. One of the speakers from the reading circle reminded us that the title, Captive Imagination, is in fact the title of the English version. In the Telugu original, the title is Companions. What Varavara Rao was in fact doing was writing about companions in jail. Jail is actually supposed to cut you off from your friends, from your companions, from your family. Imprisonment is meant to isolate. But Rao was writing about companions there. And who were they? Trees, birds, flowers, plants, a view of the sky. In writing about this kind of ordinary companionship, that Rao alludes to larger freedom movements, people's movements, international movements, to the labors of forging solidarities and taking on the fight for a genuine freedom for all people. And perhaps here lies the power of his words. We'd like to close with a recording of Varavara Rao reading one of his poems in Telugu. The poem is called Pulse. In the description, you can find the poem, a link to the poem with English subtitles.
జీవనాడి ఆశలో మేల్కొని నిరాశలో నిద్రపోతే మాత్రం ఏం? నా తరానికి నేను నాయకుణ్ణి, నా యుగస్వరానికి నేను గాయకుణ్ణి. పగటి కలల ప్రతిఫలనాన్ని రాత్రి స్వప్నంలో మాత్రమే అనుభవిస్తే మాత్రం ఏం? ఈ దినమంతా నెత్తుడితో చెమటతో కళ్ళు తడిసిపోతే మాత్రం ఏం? రేపటి వెలుగులపై విశ్వాసం వీడని వాణ్ణి. నాకు తెలుసు, నేను నా చుట్టూ ఉన్న అశాంతిని పలుకుతున్నాను. నాలో దాగి ఉన్న సుప్తాగ్నిని కెలుకుతున్నాను. రేపటి శాంతి కోసం, రేపటి కాంతి కోసం. అనంతకోటి అవ్యక్త భావాలు నా అక్షరాల్లో అభివ్యక్తి కోసం వెతుక్కుంటున్నాయి, తమ వ్యక్తిత్వం కోసం వెతుక్కుంటున్నాయి. నీగ్రో సోదరుని ఉద్యమంలోనే గాని ఇంకా జీవితంలో ఉదయించని సూర్యుడు నా హృదయంలో మండుతున్నాడు. ఆసియాలో, ఆఫ్రికాలో, యూరప్లో, అమెరికాలో, విశ్వాంతరాళంపై ఏ గోళంలోనూ నిర్బంధం కాదు, విక్రాంతి కోరుతున్న మానవుడు నా వారసుడు. ఆకలితో, తీరని కోర్కెలతో అలసిపోయిన అభాగ్యులకు ఈ లోకంలో మిగిలిపోయిన ఆశను నేను. ఏం? ఎంత అపరిపక్వమైతేనేం, ఎంత అస్పష్టమైతే మాత్రం ఏం? నేను పలుకుతున్నాను, నా యుగవాణిని పలుకుతున్నాను, ఆవేశంలో, ఆకాంక్షతో, హృదయంలోంచి స్పందించి. ఈ జనరేటర్లోంచి జన్మించిన విద్యుత్తును నేను వెలుగుతున్నాను. నేను వెనుకటి దీపాల్లా గాలిలో దేవుణ్ణి నమ్ముకొని పుట్టలేదు. నేను అణువును ఆడించి పరమాణువుతో పాడించగలను, ప్రపంచ ప్రగతి సాధించగలను. రాకెట్టుతో చంద్రునిపై నా విజయాన్ని రాయించి తీరుతాను. నా వంటి 1000 దీపాలని వెలిగించి నా ఒంట్లో ఊపిరిపోతే మాత్రం ఏం? ఈ యుగకాంతిని నేను, ఈ జనరేటర్లోంచి జన్మించిన విద్యుత్తును నేను, విప్లవాన్ని నేను.
That was Ideas Behind Bars. In the description below, you will find links to some of the resources we referred to and detailed citations of the books we read from. We welcome free use and circulation of the podcast with first publication credits to InSAF India. Stay tuned for more episodes. Follow us on Twitter at InSAF India for our latest updates.